Hello and welcome to another edition of Community Forum. My name is Joseph Feaster. I'm the host of the program. And as I say each and every time you see me, I have a great program. But today is particularly a great program because somewhat sad, somewhat joyous, because I have two guests, one of who will be leaving the position and one who will be coming to take the position. But nonetheless, it's a time of a joyous occasion for us as a town of Stoughton because we have an institution which is going through a transition, but I think the transition has been done extremely well, and the person who they've selected to fill my dear friend's space is an extraordinary individual, and you will learn more about him in a moment. But first and foremost, let me welcome my guest. First and foremost, my dear friend, the retiring superintendent of the Stoughton Public Schools, Marguerite Rizzi. I call her Maggie. I'm trying to be formal today and call her Dr. Marguerite Rizzi. And my new friend, the incoming superintendent of the Stoughton Public Schools, Dr. John Marcus. So welcome to Community Forum.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I do that on behalf of my good friend and producer who is handling double duty today, both as producing things as well as the camera, and that's Mr. Roy Cohen. He's just such an extraordinary individual, so I want to definitely give him public acclaim as we do this. But I'm going to, now after I've done the formal part, now I'm going to get down to being, we're going to be Maggie, John, and Joe.
All right.
Good.
That's what we're going to be for the rest of the program. What I like to do is, as well, is to let our viewing audience know something about our guests. I want them to feel them as a person, not necessarily in the positions that we each hold. So I'm going to start with you, Maggie. You know, tell our viewing audience a little bit about you.
Okay. It kind of feels, in a way, since this job of superintendent takes up a great deal of time, energy, and focus, that for the last 12 years, that's been a lot of my identity and who I am and what I do. But like yourself, I grew up in New York City and eventually came here for college and never left New England after that. So it's kind of like where my life got started. In my first career was primarily as a musician and a teacher of music, and I branched out to teach some other things, and eventually the balance, which was mostly music with some teaching, then became much more teaching with some music.
Well, you're being modest. Let's tell us what instrument. I mean, come on, let's be a little bit braggadocious today.
So primarily I play bass,
Okay.
but I teach other instruments as well,
Okay.
and I did do that for a long time. But I think one of the things that, one of the reasons that my resume was picked out of the massive pile of resumes 12 years ago when I first applied here, that was of interest to the people who were hiring for the Stoughton schools was actually because of that. The fact that I was a musician and the music program here is deeply and greatly valued by people, and this is a town where, unlike some, the importance and centrality of things like music in children's lives and people's lives is really important.
Isn't Stoughton known for starting one of the first orchestras or early orchestras or something in terms of musical? I know
Yes.
my history lessons tell me something about the history of Stoughton.
Yes, the longest continually running amateur music society is in Stoughton.
Okay.
And of course we have a lyre, which is a musical instrument, a harp, on the town seal. And we'll, I think, maybe talk about this a little bit more in a little while, but the high school has commissioned a piece of music which will be performed for the very first time. It's in honor of the opening of our new high school, the closing of our old high school, and some of the themes that run through that piece have been taken from music that was written in the 1700s for the Stoughton Music Society.
That was, see,
so we're bringing the past into the future.
Well, I'm glad I'm amongst educators because it'll show to our young people that, you know, history has, you know, you learn it There's some things you don't want to repeat, but there's other things that you do want to repeat, and then some things come back. Because just as you were talking about the music, my mind harkened back to that historical fact of the central place where Stoughton played in a lot of ways. If you look at even from being the town, even we'll talk about the town you just left, Sharon, in terms of that was called, it was born out of Stoughton, so from a historical standpoint. But let's talk about it from the, as you went through the educational constructs and positions to where you becoming superintendent, because you said you came here about 12 years ago, I know, as a deputy superintendent, but and you taught music, et cetera. Where were some of these places that you, you taught at, prior to coming here to Stoughton as a superintendent?
Well, I started teaching instruments in a studio setting on a one-to-one basis, so basically one musician teaching a young musician, because I learned when I was quite young that music, but jazz particularly, is an art that's passed on in a kind of a sort of an apprentice kind of fashion. So the young musician learns from the older master. And for many, many years, jazz, being primarily African-American art, did not have any place in schools or in the institutions. So, the great conservatories of Europe and didn't teach it, nor did they teach it here for quite a long time. They do now. So I started teaching individual musicians, and then I began teaching at a alternative high school for very troubled and difficult teenagers who I completely and totally adored. And I taught at Boston University for probably 7 years. And then I went to the Hull Public Schools to be their director of student services, and because it's a small district, you do everything, which is very helpful because you learn everything if you do everything. Fewer administrators to do more jobs, so that was a great learning experience for me. And then I eventually ended up here in Stoughton. Great,
history of it, and it's interesting aspects, particularly the blending of music as an educational tool as well, but going beyond that in terms of the creativity that you have, and it was evidence in how you ran the system here. But and we'll talk more about that in more detail. So, John, you're not new to Stoughton. Like I said, I've done some of the, I've done my homework. I always prepare for a show so I don't get surprises. And Roy certainly wouldn't allow me to come here unprepared. So I've done some of the homework. But again, I would like to, particularly you now coming here or returning here to Stoughton, but at least in a different capacity. Why don't you tell our viewing audience a little bit about you? Like I said, I have your whole history coming up, except for I didn't call the wife and ask her, but at least as your academic history I have right here. Why don't you, let us know a little bit about you.
Sure. Well, unlike you guys, I am a local boy, so I grew up in Randolph and spent all but a chunk of my life when I lived in France, pretty much here in Massachusetts, and was a child of a couple of very progressive people who cared deeply about the world and wanted us as kids to make the world a better place, and sort of put that that important piece into our lives and asked us to sort of go out there and do something important. And so when I was younger, I took that to heart and sang and did drama and performed as much as I possibly could all through elementary and middle school and high school, and loved it, and went to college wanting to go into theater and all that, and walked into Elliott Pearson Child Study Department, into their curriculum lab, and all of a sudden realized, wow, I need to be a teacher. Like, this place is amazing. All of the incredible curricular tools that they were building, and wood shop and toys and goop and Play-Doh and all kinds of really great things. It totally sparked me into wanting to become a teacher. So I had worked here in Stoughton from the age of 15 or 16 at Camp Westwoods with one of my mentors, Steve Kramer, who, by the way, was around when I was born. Steve took over the camp from my grandfather. So my grandfather, here's my connection with Dr. Rizzi. My grandfather ran the Nantasket Day Camp, and my grandparents lived in Hull for most of their lives, and so I spent most of my childhood on Nantasket Beach.
Right.
And wasn't a bad place.
And no, it was pretty cool. When Steve moved the camp over here to Stoughton, I followed him and came here and worked at camp for a long time and come to education, I think, with that camp philosophy, similar to Mr. Cancelleri over at Daw. I think he and I have a connection there in terms of how we see schools and education and the importance of fun and connection with kids and all that. So I went into that and was still really into wanting to be a famous psychologist someday or something like that, and ended up going to grad school for education and learning a little bit more about grown-ups and how grown-ups deal with each other, but had the bug and wanted to get into teaching, and I went to teach. I started in Newton and then went to Milton, and I taught at Milton Academy for 11 years, which was a really cool experience as a first grade teacher. Being male in the 80s teaching young kids was a different experience, but really important. And learning a whole lot. Milton, basically you show up and they say, here's a classroom and here's a bunch of kids and have a good time. There's not a set curriculum. We had to develop everything ourselves, and that really helped to foster in me that sense of giving teachers the license to be able to explore and experiment and all that. And we have 2 kids, and as the kids were starting to get older, we realized that both of us working was tough. So I raised my hand and said, I'm going to go into administration. We'll see how that works. And was lucky enough to be able to do my practicum in Needham under a woman named Miriam Cronish, who was one of the most brilliant principals I've ever seen. And then left there, did not go back to Milton, but ended up in Mansfield, and then did an assistant principal there and for a year, and then was incredibly lucky to be able to come here to the Hanson School, where I worked with an incredible staff, amazing people for 4 years, and was then thinking, someday I want to be a superintendent. So knew that I had to sort of get some experience in other places, and left here for too long, and 15 years later, I'm back, and am incredibly excited and very, very grateful, not only for the opportunity, but to see what Dr. Rizzi and her team has put into place since I've been gone is pretty remarkable, from music to arts to sports to incredible aftercare and out of school time programs to the tremendous academic success that the town is having. She is incredible, and I know I'm filling some big shoes, but hopefully with her mentorship and guidance, that this will be a seamless transition, and we'll keep the Stoughton schools moving.
You know, well, both great histories of your evolutions through the careers which you love so dearly, you know, but I always, my training just teaches me to pull out kernels of different and connections of things, and I'm doing this principally for our viewing audience, and particularly for our young people, because when you start talking about what makes the person whole and what takes you to a career path or advancing, or no matter what it might be, there's certain ingredients, certain things you have to have within you. A society can shape you, but you also have to have, you know, some views. And one of the things that would mention, with both of you would mention, was your experience in the arts. You know, theater, music, you know, I just throw myself in. At least I sang in the choir. I sang solo, L-O-W, and I acted in one play. I acted in one play called The Miracle Worker in high school. So I'm joining you in the arts. Okay, that's my part for the arts. And then and then the other thing is in terms of the grounding that you had in terms of a community and individuals who influenced you in doing that, and both talking about camp experiences. I mean, mine was I went to Camp Minnesink and went through the same thing as a camper and a CIT counselor in training. Camp, you went to Camp Westwood, which is right down West Street, down from me. Down from me. So I say that to our young people, serving in a lot of these positions and doing the things that you're doing are all building blocks to making a career happen. And just listening to the two of you says to me that that's what we need to impart to this generation, that some of these things that you may think have no meaning when you're young have a lot of meaning as you begin to look back and say, how did I become the person that I am today? So I commend both of you for that. Now you were nice to leave out things like Bridgewater University and Bridgewater State University that you worked at, specifically the Zervis School in Newton and Sydney, but I won't tell anybody anymore and brag any more about you. What I do want to talk about, though, is, okay, we have a system in terms of a school system here, and I'm going to start with you, Dr. Rizzi, as well, because, I went and I look back, and I want you to be thinking about it because I'm going to come to you as well, John, on this particular piece. You're in a school system, and I went and I said, let me go look at some of the rankings in terms of, let me go look at the rankings, because that's what everything ultimately comes, we become a society of, is where's your number? We deal with numbers. And so, I read, and if I'm incorrect on any of this, correct me, please. It says on this, I forgot which ranking I looked at, but it said, Stoughton is an above average school district in Massachusetts, is number 130 out of 218. Nationally, 2,895 out of 10,758 school districts. That's what it reports. Sharon, where you're coming from, is top-rated school district in Massachusetts. It's number 21 out of 218. Nationally, 172 out of 10,758. Now, I always called it, when I was here, and Dr. Rizzi and I would, Maggie and I would talk. I say the battle of the S's that we would have. Let's talk about it legacy-wise. I mean, you have a lot of great things. I can recall when we've done previous programs, we talked about the different tests and rankings on different tests that were coming in, and we would always, commend ourselves when we were ahead of the other S in some of these things. We've talked about, we've got the new, in terms of the new high school coming online and what it might mean. We've been, in our sports programs, the things that you're doing in terms of with mental health and integrating that into the system. So let's talk about Stoughton in the totality, because numbers do not tell everything. Because I saw with schools, did Sharon get all A's in this ranking that I saw? No, they didn't get all A's in certain areas if you start to peel away to some specifics. So let's talk about the system that you're leaving, John, with as you depart. So
it was, maybe the competitive part of me is not the best part of my personality, but I do remember when I first interviewed here, and they said, well, so what's your goals for the district? And I do remember saying, well, let's start with, we're going to beat Sharon in every category. And, okay, well, the accountability system has changed. So when you talk about numbers, there are always numbers these days, but we've gone from one accountability system to another. And then for a while we had one where the schools were ranked, 1 through 5. And we actually reached 4 level 1 schools the same year that Sharon did. And so, but in some ways comparisons are meaningless, because what you really are, what you're dealing with are the children who are here, and they're my responsibility. And you find that the the ranking of schools often has to do with the academic readiness of the students that come into the system. And the more well-to-do the students are and the families are, the more academically prepared they are. And so those students tend, in every country of the world, every place, and certainly in America, including Massachusetts, to do the best. So when you have students who come through your doors who do not come from a privileged background where they have had opportunities to have hundreds of books in the house and go to museums and just be exposed to all kinds of things that require money, then they'll start in a different place. So in those tests and things where you get certain numbers, those students tend to come in with a disadvantage. So our job in that case is to make as much as possible an even playing field.
Right.
Which I think we've done pretty well at doing. So you mentioned being at Milton. I had an extremely good education. I was very fortunate in that way. So when looking at what we would be, what should we aim for to provide for the children in Stoughton, I was thinking, well, okay, if you are a family where money is no object and you can buy any education that anything you want, what would you buy? I'm thinking, well, you would not buy pounding your child with math and English all day long to the exclusion of everything else.
Right.
You would buy an education where there was culture, there was music, it was exposure to many different things, an opportunity to explore, to learn how to think in many different ways. So if that's good enough for the wealthy, then that is good enough for everyone here. And that's in every instance I'm thinking, well, is this good enough for someone who could buy anything? And aim for that for everyone in all grades. And we have had, over the time that I've been here, a certain shift in terms of we've had students move into town who, our numbers of people who don't speak English have really increased, and also the number of students in poverty. So we've put a lot of things in place, including all of that time before school, after school, during vacations, during the summer, so that the students who maybe did not have exposure to a lot of those wonderful, fun, exciting advantages that stimulate your mind, your thinking, your curiosity, that we would find a way to provide those to everyone who walks in the door. And so that's, I hope, to as much of an extent as the resources have made possible, we've done.
Yeah. And John, I'm going to come to you in a moment, but I just want to lift up a statement that you made so our viewing audience understands. During those conversations that we had where we talked about, there were the level one schools that we had, because they look at it from high schools to middle schools to the elementary school. And I don't want folks to walk away with the idea, well, they're number 130 out of 218, but there's no education that's going on here. That's just
but
not
I got to
it.
tell you, when you say that, and I don't. There are many different rankings you look at.
That's right.
That was one, and I know Boston Magazine does this, and a lot of other people do it. They don't look at all 351 because it's too much data for them to work with. So when you're talking about where we are rated in the top 218, there are actually 350 districts.
That's right.
So, and then if you looked at us in relation to the 350, then in a percentage-wise, we'd look a little higher. Those things do count, and I have to say, if you don't do well on those state tests, if you do not, that is an absolute minimum bar. If you can't manage that, the state doesn't give you the freedom to do anything else. Right. So you have to have that taken care of, and then you say, fine, we've got that done, and now we can do some of the things that really make education stimulating, interesting, exciting, memorable, that make children want to come to school.
Absolutely.
But if you can't achieve enough in the measures that that the state says are important, then you don't get to do all that other stuff.
And I'm going to come to the state stuff for a minute, but I'm going to come to you, John, because one of the other things we didn't talk about in your introduction of yourself, that you were the former assistant superintendent for information systems and administrations for Sharon. And as Dr. Rizzi not just alluded to, but stated, there's a different wealth mix in Sharon and demographic mix in Sharon, which is different than what is here in Stoughton. So as you bring all of the learning and knowledge and experiences that you have to Stoughton, let's talk about what you see, and I'll even give you an opportunity. I wanted to save it to the end, but it's up to you whether you want to talk about what your vision is as to what you would like to see, or we can talk about it in light of the ratings that we have right now and what that meant to you there in Sharon and what it means to you now.
Sure. So we'll talk about vision and partnerships in a minute, because I do want to talk about that and the whole sort of S-Town concept in Bay Road and the double line there and what that is all about. So, but before that, I want to reiterate something that Dr. Rizzi said about, let's go back to Milton for a second and talk about, when I was there, every time that when I left Milton, every person that I talked to would say, "Oh, you taught at Milton. Oh, those kids must be rich. They must be this. They must be, whatever." All kinds of sort of prejudgments about who I was working with at Milton. And you know what? Kids are kids. I left Milton, I went to Needham. I worked in a very poor school in a very wealthy town in Needham. And people would say, "Oh, you worked in Needham." And I'm like, "No, you don't understand. The Elliott School was a different animal. We had, a big mix of kids from a variety of different kinds of housing situations. And so, but the bottom line there was that the kids were kids. So kids at Milton were the same kinds of kids that I saw in Needham. And then I went to Mansfield, and I'm thinking, all right, now I'm back in the Hockomock Swamp, and here we go. I'm going to be in Mansfield, and I've got a predetermined notion of who I'm going to be working with and what that's going to be like. And I work with some of the most creative, talented teachers that I've ever seen in Mansfield, and kids who were just like the kids at Milton and Needham and Newton. And then I came here to Stoughton, and guess what? Kids are kids. And in Sharon, it's the same thing. So yes, they have different experiences and they have different opportunities depending upon the demographic of the town, how close they are to a city, how much wealth is connected to their family, and all of that, and that makes those experiences for them different. But when push comes to shove, everywhere I've gone, kids are kids. They have skills and deficits and strengths and weaknesses and areas of opportunity, but they're passionate about all kinds of things from the young age of kids getting into engineering or science or music or art or sports, and it's our job as best as we can to foster that in the best way that we possibly can. One thing that I had in my office, going back to what Dr. Rizzi said about scores, that I pulled out of the Boston Globe that hung behind my chair at Hanson that I brought with me over to Cottage, was an article from the Boston Globe that showed a map of Massachusetts, and it colorized the wealth of all of the towns, and then it showed the MCAS scores of all of those towns. And I took that and I actually wrote in various numbers and statistics, and then did a chart. And the straight line that you can draw from the wealth of how wealthy or how big the houses are next to the school to the MCAS scores is almost incredible. It's the statistics of that, the standard deviation or whatever, is incredibly close. And so, as Dr. Rizzi was saying, there is, when you look at MCAS scores and you look at, where is your town and how are you ranked and all of that, just an enormous amount of that has to do with the opportunities financially and demographically that you have in that school or in that district. So for me, it's not so much about where does Stoughton rank or how are we compared to a town nearby or whatever. To me, it's how do we, as Maggie said, create those experiences that families may not necessarily have, that a family in Newton has, or that a family in Cambridge has. How do we bring cultural opportunities and academic opportunities to our kids and families? Because when you get down to it, they're all kids, and so they all have those same kinds of experiences. As far as the competition, I totally get that. I'm also really competitive, and ask my former colleagues, the principals of Adaw and Gibbons and West Wilkins, back then, that I came in as a 32-year-old kid and was bound and determined to make Hanson the best school possible. And I think I drove Tony Sarno crazy by continually pushing the envelope a little bit. So yes, I love competition, and I think it's important. When I went over to Sharon, I was ready to write a book called Crossing Bay Road, because it was this really interesting experience to sort of see, when I was at Hanson, we were like, oh, those Sharon people, whatever. They would come and sled on Chemung Hill and drive us crazy. And then I went over, and what I discovered was, people are people, kids are kids, and they've got their own wishes and hopes and things like that. And so coming back across, what I see is an incredibly important thing that was around, I think, in the 60s and 70s, that I heard Helen Hansen talk a lot about when I was here, which were these amazing connections that we had between the two towns. That there were all kinds of professional development experiences that teachers had together. There were administrative kinds of things that we did together. And we lost that, I think, over time because of competition, because of nasty things like MCAS that get you competing without connecting. And so one of my hopes is, as a guy who lives in the town just south of here in Easton, and has worked in the town just west of here in Sharon, that we're going to be able to form more partnerships and make more connections with our colleagues to be able to build everybody up, and maybe make that the competition, that it's more sort of regional as opposed to sort of individual school-based or individual town-based, but that we're actually taking the whole area and doing some really wonderful things that we can then look to the North Shore and say, hey, look at this. This is pretty cool.
Well, and again, I like your thinking on that, John, because I'm a believer in collaboration. When I ran track and I ran team, I ran relays. And you learn very quickly you can't, obviously with a relay, each person has to run their leg, and so you're interconnected. Simply, I don't care how fast you are or how well, someone drops the baton, the team has lost. So I like that concept. There's so much I want to cover, and you folks are just great in terms of that. But what I'm going to do now is go to our sponsors, because I want to come back. I'll give you a little precursor to what I want to cover. I want to talk about, dollars and cents ultimately make a district as well. The per pupil spending, and I want to talk about it in respect to the 2 S's. I want to talk about some of the state's funding, Chapter 70 funds. I want to talk about some of the things I know. I've been reading about what the governor is doing and what the legislature is doing, and a lot of advocacy that's going on by the Mass Teachers Associations, et cetera, around funding here in the Commonwealth. And then I want to talk about issues that are great interest to me. One is special needs, and the other one is diversity. So we'll be back in a moment.
Hi, this is Roy Cohen. The crew would like to thank Maxie's Delicatessen, located at 117 Sharon Street in Stoughton. You can reach them by calling 781-341-1662. The American Cancer Society is looking for volunteers to drive cancer patients to and from treatments. You can volunteer by calling 1-800-ACS-6662 or online at www.cancer.org. Ilse Mock's Food Pantry and St. Anthony's Free Market is located at 2 Park Avenue in Stoughton. For more information, call Christine Gallagher. That's 781-341-0611 or 781-341-0549. To get involved with Meals on Wheels, call Jessica at 781-344-8882, extension 2. The Stoughton Penny Saver. Our business is advertising your business in Stoughton. To advertise, call 781-344-4833. Community Forum showtimes here in Stoughton You can see it on Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays at 6 p.m., Monday at 8 p.m., Tuesday at 5 p.m., either on Comcast Channel 9 or Verizon Channel 28. If you have any comments or suggestions, contact us at communityforum1@yahoo.com. Samaritans, 41 West Street, 4th floor in Boston, Massachusetts, 02111, or call them at 617-536-2460. The 24-hour helplines, 877-870-HOPE or 877-870-4673. Samaritans, 800-252-TEEN or 800-252-8336, or online www.samaritanshope.org. For you bingo players, I want to tell you about the Monday night bingo being held at the Ahava Torah Congregation, 1179 Central Street in Stoughton. The doors open at 4:30 p.m. The games start at 6:30 p.m. You come on down and win some money. They have two big prizes. One is $1,199 and the other one is up to $3,000. So come on down.
Well, hello. If you're just tuning in, this is Community Forum. I am the host, Joseph Feaster. My guests today are Dr. Marguerite Rizzi, who is the retiring superintendent of the Stoughton, I almost said Boston, Stoughton Public Schools, and the incoming superintendent, Dr. John Marcus, who will be taking over the helm this coming July. We've had an interesting conversation, folks, and I gave some prelude to some of the things that I would like to cover in this segment here. But before I do, because I don't want to run out of time and not thank the people that helped to make this this program possible, and I first want to thank Michael Hammond, who is the chief of this operation here at the Stoughton Media Access Corporation, the program director, Jeff Pickett. The person who usually does the floor managing and the camera has been out, and he is recovering, but he's a good friend, and I want to wish him to continue recovery. That's Leo McGowan.
Hey, Leo.
CJ Mullen works with Jeff Pickett in producing a lot of the programming around here. The person that you see here with us today does multiple things, and such as a great executive producer of this program, Community Forum, since I took over doing this. One of the persons doing the Community Forum hosting is Roy Cohen, the executive producer. Gina Coe is another producer here for the program. And then, of course, the person who has helped organize a lot of what we were doing today, and the person you have to watch out for the bloopers, and has many skills in terms of editing and has his own program, and that's Dave Young. And oftentimes, Frank Walsh, who has his own program here as well, 2 programs here, has assisted us with the cameras. And so just want to thank all of them. I mean, it's important. I've learned that very well from mom and dad, that to give folks the public thanks that is due when they make certain things happen. We talked about your philosophies of education. We talked about how you came to be where you are, your pathways. We imparted some things which we think would be helpful for our young people to embrace as they, matriculate through life and determine what they want to do. But one of the realities are that in order to run a school district, you need money, and we have so many different ways in Massachusetts on how we determine that, how we do the per pupil spending, and I presume that's tied into the Chapter 70, which is the state legislative moniker for how they fund public schools and charter schools, I predict here in Massachusetts. So I want to talk a little bit about that from both of your perspectives. But I've also been reading as some of the, if you see, advocacy around increasing school funding, and I just want to point out some of the things that I've been reading. There's a Promise and Cherish Act, which is going through the legislative process right now, and they're trying to fund public schools K through 12 and higher education, because at $1 billion, they want an infusion of $1 billion into the system, because they're saying there was a study back in 2015 that said we're underfunded by $1 to $2 billion in funding public schools throughout the Commonwealth. And this, in 2015, was a legislative foundation budget and review commission that made this finding. This just isn't just somebody sitting over just saying, oh, let's come up with a number.
Right.
They actually did the type of study, and I think I know some of the people that were involved in that. So let's talk about it from the standpoint of the funding. I want to start with you, Maggie, and what you saw in terms of Stoughton, and then John. You're now going to inherit the beast. Whatever it's going to be, it's going to be. So again, is there advocacy? It is. So let's talk about it from the standpoint of what you experienced, particularly over the 10 years as superintendent, but 12 years here in Stoughton. What was the funding like? Because that's constantly the tussle, both state-wise, and we know we had the tussle here local-wise as to how between town side, school side. So, so let's talk about that a bit.
So if you were to take Massachusetts, separated from the rest of America, and consider it a country, we would be in the top 2, 3, or 4 countries in terms of the quality of education in the world. So when we're compared with the rest of the world, Massachusetts has incredibly good schools. So we really need to start with that. We have extremely high standards. There's so much more to do, but it has to be looked at in the context of we live in a state where the education is pretty darn good compared worldwide. And some of that has to do with the Education Reform Law of 1993, and a group of people spent a great deal of time talking, thinking, planning around really upping the infusion of resources into education, because we all know education by definition is expensive, and great education is more so. And partly that's because no matter how much technology we have to use as tools, the development of all of those things, which is a great gift and very important, but really education is a relationally based activity. One person teaching other people. So that was recognized as part of this whole conversation. So a formula was put in place. Now the MCAS testing is part of that, and some people, we have our mixed feelings about the testing, and it's flawed to a certain extent. However, it has upped the floor a great deal, I think, and part of what the state wanted to do when they introduced that accountability system was to provide money for it. So the Education Reform Law planned for a certain amount of money, which would eventually grow, to actually provide the resources that would be necessary to provide the education we really all want to provide for all of our students. But the funding formula from the beginning was only able to provide maybe 10% of what you would need. And of course, the communities have to make a contribution, and the contribution of the communities comes from property taxes. And this is part of why you see so much of a variation in schools, because if people can afford a lot of property tax, there's more money. And in Stoughton, we have a very, very fortunate situation. We have some very large stores like IKEA, like Target. We have chain restaurants. We have hotels. We still have some manufacturing. So we don't need to get all the money just out of people's houses, which is helpful. So, and our current governor is very committed to education, and again, give him a lot of credit for that. And the group of the task force that you were talking about that's been looking at the funding formula, which said, look, a lot of years have gone by now, and we're just going to need to, if we really are serious about this, then we have to start putting in infusions of cash. Now, if you look on the local level, I have to say thank you to the town meeting of Stoughton for all the years that I've been here, and the many years before that, and the finance committee of the town. They have always been as generous with the schools as they possibly can, and that's been very helpful to us. But when you look at the average that a school district spends on children, the average is about $13,000 per student now across the state, and we are a good $1,000 below that. So we've done the very, very best that we can. I think squeezing every single thing we can out of every dollar, even though our per pupil expenditure is lower than average. And at some point, and I would say we're kind of at a place, this is a juncture of decision now, because as a school system this year, when town meeting ended, we got a $48 million budget. And thank you, town meeting, and we will do great things with that money. But it's $48 million out of a $104 million budget.
Right.
So while we have 75% of the staff of the town and 85% of the buildings, we basically have about 45% of the revenue. And so we'll be able to continue. So you're going to be getting a school system where you'll be able to do all the things you're doing and then maybe a little bit more. But this is the point at which, if that percentage doesn't change, you're going to start to see a degradation of service just when we're starting to see an influx in the population because people are drawn by the new building, by the new library, by a lot of hope and excitement, by the fact that the school system is now well known. It's not a secret anymore. So you don't want to see people coming for something that the quality is not able to be kept up. So when you look at the revenue that comes into the town, there really has to be a very serious conversation about making sure that the schools get enough. Don't take for granted what you have, because what you have is based on great decisions over the years, and to deviate from that decision-making process in the slightest is going to land you in a situation when you look at a town and you say, oh boy, that's too bad, their schools are bad, why'd you? It's because they didn't make the kind of decisions that people in Stoughton did. And that has to continue, because you either go up or you go down. There is no resting on your laurels in this world.
I know, John, you would want to comment, but I'm watching the clock and I have so many different
sorry.
issues. No, it's not, no. I just wanted to be able to say, I mean, that set the financial picture in a way which, even our fifth graders will be able to understand exactly what may need to be done if we want to go forward.
I think it'll be a really important and interesting infusion of information and perspective. The fact that you are coming from a district where the funding conversation in terms of the schools versus the other services is a very, very different one. And I think it'll be really important that people are going to be able to hear that from you too.
And with that, I would like to now. I want to shift because I don't think I'm going to get to all the topical areas, but that's okay. That I want to talk about. But what I do want to do is I want to talk about taking that financial piece, inheriting the system, the dollars that you do have. What are your goals and objectives?
Well, so if I can just comment on a couple of things that Dr. Rizzi said. So I think one of the tricky parts about ed reform and the Chapter 70 formula is that it set up the difference between making things equal and making things equitable. Right, so Chapter 70 was really about trying to equalize and give everybody somewhere around the same level of basic funding. And the tricky part about that is, as Dr. Rizzi was saying, that you can get to that level of funding, but then if you don't have the resources or you're not making the commitment as a town to then further that along, and I know Stoughton has the ability to do that, then you're always going to be somewhere at that same level as everybody else. You're not going to be able to sort of advance new ideas or new ways of doing things. And that in and of itself is a really important self-fulfilling prophecy or cycle, where the more you are funding and advancing and growing, the more that it starts to support the town, and the more that the town starts to then take that pride. Property values go up, people are more interested, and it's clear that that's happening here, that you guys have done a really nice job of that. And I've seen that, as you say, from different towns, different perspectives, and how critically important it is that our priorities revolve around that cycle of continual improvement and continual advancement. And it does take not just relying on Chapter 70. That just sort of equalizes the playing field. It really requires us making priorities about the education system that then help us to advance and help us to grow.
And that was one of the things around both, Maggie mentioned both the high school, and also in terms of the library
Right,
that we've
right,
been
true.
that got great support here in the town. Let's talk about it. You're now getting the system, because I'm going to give you a chance. I'm watching the clock, but I want to talk about legacy. I want to talk about what's happening with the building, and I want to, by the time this program airs, your retirement party would have already been held. But, but in any event, John, you inherited. We talked
Right.
about in terms of the needs. You're going forward in some of the specific topics that I want to discuss. I'm going to bring you back, and we'll have a conversation about them, because I
Sure.
don't think we're going to get to them.
Sure.
So, what do you see now? July 1, you're taking over the helm. What do you see for the next school year? I'd say, I always like to talk about, I'm a political guy, the first 100 days.
Right. So first and foremost, being a political guy is the critical aspect of shutting up and listening and paying attention to what are the hopes and wishes of people here. What are the values in Stoughton? What are our teachers, administrators, parents, kids, what are they looking for? What are they hoping for? And how can I, in the best way that I can, support them? How can I carry on the legacy of amazing things that are happening? And how can I, as I'm listening, see those areas of opportunity where I might be able to bring a new perspective or a different set of connections that I have from other places I've been, and bring that to the fore and help the district. So I think first and foremost is really learning and understanding where we're at and what people are hoping for, what they're wishing for. And that's, that sort of listening tour that any entry plan is going to be about, which is making sure that I'm talking to the selectmen, the business folks, the local community members, our kids in any way possible, our teachers, administrators, so really paying attention to that. And that takes a while. I think it takes more than 100 days, but that's a biggie. In that listening, I think one of the key things is looking for areas of some of the basics, so where our values line up. So safety is obviously number one. I don't think that anybody would disagree. I know that that's Dr. Rizzi's number one, and that's the district's number one. And so that's one of those things where you don't wait, that I'm not going to wait 100 days, that if I see something, that we're going to work on that right away. So any areas of safety or things like that are going to be critical. And then I'm going to be looking for what kinds of opportunities people are hoping for and wishing for that I might be able to bring in. Like my predecessor, I love the arts, and so that's incredibly important to me. But I also love sports and sporting experiences, and so those are really important to me. I'm also an academic, and so that is going to be something that I'm going to be looking for. I think building relationships and partnerships as much as I can within the town is going to be critical. And a big goal for me is that notion that we were talking about before in terms of funding, is the whole notion of equity. And equity to me branches off into cultural proficiency and how we are understanding each other, how we're understanding our constituents, our families, and where we're moving from that notion of sort of tolerance or acceptance into a place of celebration and really honoring and supporting different ways of being in our town. And we're growing and changing just like everybody around us, and so how do we see that change as a positive thing, and how do we take advantage of that and make it something that we really celebrate as a community?
Well, I like your style, because that's exactly when I came as interim town manager, how I met this great superintendent on my first hours of being appointed, was to do the reaching out that you do. And I just think that any person, administrator, needs to be able to think in those terms, that you have to think outside the box and outside the building you're in to do that type of gravitating. So I'm going to wish you well, but I'll be here for us to have more conversations in the future and drill down on some areas. But I want to talk about the legacy of my friend here, and also, there are some things happening around the building that you want to talk about. Like I said, by the time this program airs, we will have feted you or feeded you, however it's pronounced. I think it's feted you at a retirement situation, in which I definitely will be at for sure, with bells on. So let's talk about the Maggie Rizzi legacy as superintendent.
Well, that's probably something that is going to be better spoken about by other people rather than me. So that's maybe I should leave that to other people to decide
Well, I'm going to give
what
you the
that
right.
was. But I would say that when I started in 2009, it was a really, really, really bad economic situation. And so it was very, very difficult. But I thought, hey, it can only get better after this. So being able to, in those early years, shepherd the system through that really economic disaster without having a great deal of it get lost, that was a great thing. Finding people to work with to build that new building, which is about to be complete.
And when is the event for that, just so we can get that on air before
Well,
we close?
there'll be an event to celebrate the closing of the old building on Father's Day. And that's, I think, the 16th of June.
Yeah.
And then there will be a ribbon cutting for the new building in August, and I think the date is the 26th. But that will be made more public as it comes closer. And we'll take possession of the building at that point in time.
Well, I'm sure that you will hear so many things about the great things that you did for our school system here. And I personally, and I think I can speak broadly on behalf of the town, want to thank you for that. John, I want to welcome you here. You know, you need not be a stranger to a community forum. If you don't call me, Roy or I will call you. Try to get you in here, and maybe after your we've done the 100 days programs, and so we'll do that with you as well.
Great.
So as my time is about to whittle away, I want to thank both you, Maggie and John, for being here. I want to wish you success in your retirement. We can't lose contact.
We will not.
And John, I want to welcome you to Stoughton.
Thank you so much.